In the late summer of that year, we lived in a house that looked across a river and a broad plain toward a low line of distant mountains. The river lay in its pale bed of pebbles and boulders, dry and bright when the sun found it. In the channels, the water ran clear and quick, and the blue of it was always the color of good weather. From our window, we watched men and machines move along the road, troops that kept coming and going, mules with heavy packs, motor trucks with canvas loads, long guns shadowed by leafy branches to hide their glint. Dust rose and lay like a pale sugar on the leaves and the trunks of the trees, so that even the bark seemed powdered. Early in that year, leaves fell before they were supposed to, whip-thin against the wind, and the road would be left bare, and white save for the drifting brown that had once been green. At night, when the whole plain slept, you could still see the distant flashes of artillery against the mountains, like summer lightning seen through a valley, quick and cold. Occasionally, the tread of men would pass under our window, or the dull mechanical pulse of a tractor pulling a gun, and the world would hum with movement, someone going somewhere, someone else brought back. It was, for all its strangeness, a kind of ordinary life. The river ran, the trees stood, the troops kept on, and in the small hours when everything else seemed to sigh and spool out, the plain exhaled its coolness and settled into the weather of the valley. It was the war's rhythm that made the days feel both close and remote. On the plain, the crops grew until the shoots were cut down by frost. In the vineyards and orchards, people worked and tended to the vines, while behind them, the hills and chestnut forests changed with the seasons. Autumn came with rain and a heaviness that blackened trunks and turned the vines bare-fingered and brown. There were mists over the river then, and trucks that splashed the wet road. Men wore capes and moved as if the weight of what they carried had become part of their bodies, pouches and belts that made them walk as though with a strange, stubborn pregnancy. Small motor cars sped with officers tight in the front seats, the king's motor sometimes among them, traveling out from the capital to see how the line stood. War changed the countryside as surely as the weather did. Oaks fell where shells struck. Stumps rose like teeth from blasted ridges, and whole avenues of trees might be scored with scars, as if an enormous hand had dragged a finger along a barked spine. When winter came with its rain, the fear of cholera passed like a hush over everything. Through it came smaller mercy. The disease was checked, and people went on. Then, with a cold and resolution all its own, spring returned. The fields colored again, small leaves wormed out along the road, and a breeze from the sea made the hair of the trees ripple. The town where we lived changed too. A square with its fountains and thin lime trees could be battered, and yet still hospitable. Cafes kept their tables warm, and small hospitals opened their doors for the soldiers who moved through. Officers and strangers sat with us at tables beneath candles that made puddles of light on the cloth. Men told stories and joked at the priest. a young man in a collar and uniform, always wore a calm smile that did not quite hide the tiredness in his eyes. Conversation lasted, as if afraid of being cut short by some outer bell. Of books that shook faiths, of music that bellowed and made the throat ache, of distant cities and nearer girls who were both the same and wholly different. Life threaded itself through those nights: wine, coffee, cigarettes, the ache of missing places you had loved, and the reckless, messy consolation of being alive in a single, sharp moment. The most ordinary days could become strange and intimate quickly. There were afternoons when the sun would lift a pale warmth, and I would walk down the alley of trees and find the same rooms waiting for me, made up the same as I had left them. There was the quiet domestic choreography: washing, brushing, the carefully folded belongings in trunks, the smell of marble in threshold corridors that made it feel as if one could build a life on top of war, a life made of small rituals, like spinning the wine bottle free of its cradle to pour for a friend, or the particular way one took spaghetti on a fork and held it for a breath before lowering it back into a mouth. There were also the days of sudden movement, orders to go up to the posts on a morning when the sun glanced off the water, the sight of the new road weaving down a mountainside, the thin, bright arrow of rockets signaling in the dark that the artillery had been called. Once, it was in that kind of motion that the line of trucks and men slowed, and we were stalled in the rainy, churned mud of a retreat. A slow, purposeless river of soldiers and carts, each vehicle as vulnerable as a small raft. You learn in such places and by such tiny measures what steadiness is: to wash in a basin of cold water and pin a shirt with methodical care, to practice firing a small, recalcitrant pistol until your hands stop flinching at the jerk, to write a postcard that says nothing more than "I am well." It is the small, practical things that keep the edges from tearing, securing the motor's bearings and tires, finding a place for ambulances that won't be shelled, making the list of who stays and who goes. Yet even those practicalities could become a kind of ritual that warmed the nights. A man's glass tapped gently by friends, a joke told for no other reason than the laughter it demanded, a story repeated until the telling softened the fear. Then love can arrive readily, astonishingly, in the middle of such smallness. It is not always itself at first. It might be a game, a series of evenings, the gentle locking of hands across a table. Once you notice it, though, it settles like a second skin. There are afternoons of walking by river and town, of sitting beneath lime trees while the lights of a motor car go by, of talking until your words seem like a private language. There are nights in a quiet little room under sheets and candles where one voice is the only sound that matters. You lean toward it like a ship finding its harbor after a long passage. In that shelter, you tell each other your softest untruths, and the lie of them becomes a promise if you want it to. As if, by naming love, you could hold the world in the palm of your hand for a while. You make vows almost the way boys make maps, sometimes for keeping, sometimes only to hold the place where you would like to go should you ever get there. The rooms of hospitals, too, become a theater for intimacy. The white tiles, the rustle of nurses' gowns, the precise small talk about temperatures, the tea taken from flasks, the long, limber motions of dressings being changed. In the bright quiet of such places, by an open window through which cold air slips, people learn each other in a different way, by the thinness of voice when one is in pain, by the way a hand squeezes a thumb in a breath. Sometimes there is laughter. The young priest who blushes and is teased by men who have known too much. Sometimes there is a deeper diplomacy, a surgeon who speaks softly as he passes instruments across a table and says things about healing without pretending the world outside will change. Then there are the nights of thunder and rupture, the months when an offensive is ordered or a line breaks open and men move like flotsam on the road. In those hours, you know the truth of how fragile your plans are. A column stalls, a car sinks into mud, a squad of bicycle troops slips by in the rain, a man you trusted is shot down on a bank of the Tagliamento, and the current takes what it takes. You find yourself clinging to rough timber, floating in a river where the cold bites and the current rounds you like a small piece of detritus. You learn then how the body does what the body can. You throw your weight and feel yourself come up. You hold on when there's nothing else to hold. Afterwards, later, in the small warmth of a train, you count what remains. Sometimes the counting is simple and savage. 3 vanished drivers, a friend's bright face laid flat in the mud. Sometimes the counting is rhetorical. The catalogue of losses becomes an inventory of jokes, medals, and a few paper dreams. There comes a quieter kind of travel too, the kind where you escape into a colder, calmer country, and the war begins to feel hardly believable at all. You go to a lake where the winter holds a different rule. Snow on the mountains, pines that breathe cold, village paths high and dry under packed snow. There you keep a small double life, one domestic and slow, with logs fed into a porcelain stove, the other small and sharp. When you go down to town to eat, or to a gymnasium to box in a corner of an arcade, and watch the ordinary people move and think about lives that are not stitched to artillery. In that place, your days fill with small, shining things. Early morning walks when the frost has made the road a hard ribbon. Afternoons when the wind comes down the valley with a cold, bracing mouth that feels as if it could name everything. And nights when the stars are so close you imagine you could climb the path into them. You come to know, intimately, the simple pleasures of fresh butter on a warm roll, of a cup of smoking coffee, of the way sunlight will cut a terrace of vines into a silver band. Winter has a geometry. It makes your life small and exact, and in that exactness, love deepens its shape. As the months pass, honest things happen quietly and with ordinary gravity. There is a baby to think of. You imagine names in the low light of an evening. You buy small garments. You prepare a room that will hold a new life. The ways in which an ordinary life arranges itself become suddenly more precious. The measured step by step toward the hospital, the quiet handshake with a doctor, a list of small errands that make the days sane. The hospital becomes a kind of high altar of caution. One goes there with a bag that seems too small for what it must contain. The things you might need for delivery, and the things you know you will never have again. The hours in the delivery room are like nothing else. They are both sharp and private, and in a way, astonishingly ordinary. Gas, cold, clean, desertion into sleep comes as a strange blessing, like a single small miracle put within reach of stretchers and tables. There is the strange, solemn choreography of doctors and nurses, hands moving in a practiced order, instruments lined on shiny trays, voices that talk in exact measures while they watch the body at work and the clock at war with pain. Once the surgeon's hands move and the world narrows to something very simple, the problem and how to fix it. A long operation becomes a sealed hour where only skill and a kind of prayer will do. Afterward, even if the baby comes, there is no triumph that wipes away the strain. Sometimes a child is born alive and opens his mouth to the world and makes the small, fierce noises that mean life. Other times the body that was to be a new person does not begin its breathing. In that terrible, quiet the truth of how little predictability there is can strike like a cold slap. You stand at the edge of everything, and you realize that the only thing that binds you to anything is the hands you hold and the small, stubborn work of being there. When a death happens, particularly a newborn's death, it is a soft, devastating silence. And when the woman who bore that child is grievously ill, the world is even smaller and more helpless. You do not have words for those hours. You stand in corridors where fluorescent light is harsh, and the rain outside slats at the windows, and you wish for an answer that does not come. There are no triumphs that take away the grief. To live is to accept that sometimes the smallest bodies fail to breathe, and the largest hands cannot stop the bleeding. You learn humility in the way the surgeon stitches with a smooth, clean hand, watching the wound fold closed as if the body itself had a library of stitches bound inside it. And you learn how fragile speech becomes in the face of a great, quiet loss. You bring your coat in and sit in a chair under a small reading lamp and look across the hall into the dark where the hospital sleepwalks its patients through the night. You try to pray, and the language you have to pray in does not seem to answer. You try to reason, and the logic betrays you. The only sure thing left is to be present. That presence becomes a kind of small sacrament. Grief is not a single kind of ache. It is a long season with short, sharp storms. Sometimes you see the whole world under a rain where sound breaks and things become very far away. Sometimes you find the courage to hold a hand and speak about trivial things, the color of the lake beyond the window, an anecdote about some small folly. and by speaking you prove that life will go on, whether or not it bows to immediacy. You keep the memory of what has passed alive by the simplest means, remembering how a voice used to rise, how a laugh could turn a dull noon into a small, bright theater, how a hand could sweep your hair back and make you feel less alone. Over years, these experiences grind and smooth the corners of a person. The plain keeps its seasons. Mountains are as indifferent as mountains. Troops move. Smoke goes up in the distance. Food and politics and the bustle of towns continue. The river runs its old course of pebble and current, and the quieter acts tending a garden, mending a shirt, sharing tea in a small, hot kitchen, somehow become the great acts. The small life becomes an ethic unto itself. If you are lucky, you let it teach you how to be gentle. You learn how to hold a person who has been hurt and how to be held in return. You learn how to keep a place warm for someone who will be gone, and how not to let that absence hollow you so that you are only a shell walking among people with their small, ordinary troubles. At night, sometimes, when you have worn the day away, and the lamp on your bedside table makes a small pool of light on the coverlet, you think about those you have loved with a tenderness that humbles you. You remember the ordinary gestures that came to mean everything, the quick press of a thumb, the way silence fell between two people and felt like an embrace. You remember, too, the smaller, harder lessons, that the world will not always notice what you save, that the things you cannot control are larger than your plans, but also that you still have in your power the kindness of being there. If there is a way to be consoling about sorrow, it is this: grief does not disappear, but it changes its shape. It becomes less raw, and it finds its place among the work of living. In the end, the things that matter are often the things that cannot be measured. A well-tied scarf, a warm bowl of soup, a hand that does not speak but understands everything in its hold. These are small mercies, but they hold the world together. They are the steady stones in a riverbed when the current is terrible and wide and takes what it will. These stones remain, a map to where it is possible to put your feet again. So if you lie down to sleep now, imagine a river on a summer afternoon, clear and cool, with pebbles underfoot, the distant mountain steady. Imagine the small rooms made warm for you with blankets, and the soft, careful hands of friends. Think about the people you love, those you held, and those who hold you, and how their faces bend toward you like small lamps. Think, finally, of some ordinary kindness you can do tomorrow. Give a chair when someone needs it. Share bread and something to drink. Say what is true. The world is very big and contains much sorrow, but it is also thick with small, shining things which, over the long nights and days, will keep us going. Now breathe slowly. Let your thoughts become like the river's surface at dusk, wider, softer, and cooling. Let every exhale unlock a small relief, and let your last breath be a small, clean promise to be kind when the light comes again.